Okay, it being 6 p.m, the meeting of the 27th of July Ordinary Council meeting is resuming as determined. Councillor Sciano and Councillor McCleary are unable to attend and henceforth will be unable to attend the reconvened meeting and will be recorded in the minutes as apologies. We now resume debate from where it was left on Officer's Recommendation number 2 as part of item 15.1. The item had been moved, Councillor Sciano, and seconded Councillor McCleary. Councillor Sciano had retained his right to speak. Councillor McCleary had spoken. So debate is now on the floor. Any councillor wishing to speak for or against that item? Councillor Tarantroy?
I'm just speaking for the item. I think it's a wonderful thing that that we've got a grants rate concession for 22-23 rates, and I think that this is to the maximum amount of 218.54. So I think, as read, I think it's good, and I'll be supporting the motion.
Any other speakers? Councillor Noonan?
Just a query, if I could, Mr. President. At the front, under the officer's recommendation for 15.1.2, it says to his granting of a rate concession, 50% reduction to the SAR to Dalyellup residents. Can I just ask, is that taking the rate that has been suggested in the table and then applying a 50% reduction to that rate, or?
Sorry. The Director of Community and Corporate.
Thank you. Sorry for jumping in there through the chair, if I may. The rate in the cents in the dollar in the rating table is the reduced 50% rate.
Through you, so it's what we talked about in the workshops. It's the 50% to meet the 50% cost of all of that.
The parks, gardens, maintenance structures.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other speakers? The mover not being present, the item will just go straight to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that is carried 4-3. Officer's Recommendation 3. Is there a mover? Councillor Noonan. Seconder, Councillor Dillon. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll move that as read.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, this has been going on for years with a property spanning both the Capel and Busselton Shires, so yeah, just as read. Thank you.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? No discussion. Councillor Noonan, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr. President. I think that we should continue with the practice that has been carried out in previous years. Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-1. Officer's Recommendation number 4. Is there a mover? Councillor Dillon. A seconder? Councillor Tarantroy. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not much to say, just pretty much as read, pretty standard part of a budgetary process, so just as read. Thank you.
Councillor Tarantroy? Is there any speakers against the item? Councillor Andrew?
Just a question, if I could. I noticed that we charge 3% and then 7% on late rates. Since this isn't money that we technically borrow, so we aren't paying interest on it, what are the actual costs to us for non-issue of rates? And I guess that's it. That's my question.
Okay, the Director of Community and Corporate.
Thank you, through the chair. When you say non-issue of rates, so non-payment, yeah, I suppose it varies from year to year. I suppose best case scenario, you would hope that ratepayers pay their rates within the timeframes that's detailed within the agenda item. I suppose the impost or the implication that we have on the Shire is that if that doesn't happen and we have a cash flow situation where we can't meet our debts, that's when the monies that we collect through this supports resource the collection of that income to come into the Shire. And in totality, it probably makes up around 170,000 of income that we need to support the finance team collect debt on behalf of the Shire.
Sorry, I think you've misunderstood my question. Sorry. So the 3% and the 7% that we charge, which is obviously an extra that we then receive, what do we use that money for, or how do we justify the 3% and then the 7% interest?
Okay, so basically both of those, the income that's accrued from both those recoups are to support the administration in managing the debt collection and the debt recovery process.
Any further? Councillor Clues?
Thank you. A follow-up question to that, if I may.
Yep.
What has been our annual costs recently on debt recovery, and what has been our annual receivable of these penalty rates?
Well, the
Director of Community and Corporate.
Well, the receivables is through the budget monitoring that you'd have had through the periods, is that we've collected around 170,000 through this mechanism. But as I was saying, that money is to offset the resource that's required in the collection and the maintenance of that service for the Shire. Sorry,
I guess then the first part of the question I'd still like an answer to was what is the debt recovery cost to the Shire?
Sorry, so just to understand your question. The cost to engage a debt collector?
Well, I don't suspect that we would use a debt collector in every case, so I'm asking what is the cost of the debt recovery to the Shire annually?
The Director of Community and Corporate.
Thank you. Each I suppose each case is quite unique, and it's not just contributory to a particular financial year. It could be where we have a particular ratepayer that has debt over a number of years, and so in terms of that can be quite burdensome. As you know, we've got a financial hardship policy, and we try and offset as much as we possibly can, but yeah, it's hard to answer that on a case-by-case situation. And like you say, you are quite right in terms of what you say. Debt collection through a third-party agency is the last resort, but through what we collect would not cover the cost of that service on a case-by-case situation.
Further question, Councillor?
I'll move an amendment, if I may.
Yes.
To remove everything after discount from Part 4.
So from where, councillor?
Sorry, I'm looking at a different page, aren't I? No, that's right, I can see it. Yeah, I guess remove that whole part, that whole with the first instalment payable. Oh, geez, you could probably keep going up.
Is that your amendment on the board, councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Is there a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Andrew? Councillor Clues?
Thank you. Yeah, this is, has been troubling me for the last couple of years. This, I guess, this penalty that we impose on those that, once again, are struggling the most. I'm sure everyone would love to pay their rates off on the first day they receive the bill if they were able, and particularly to hear that we have some long-term people that are struggling to get their rates in. Well, this penalty obviously isn't helping that situation. So, you know, I think cost of the staff. Well, we have the staff here anyway. What should we lay the staff off if they don't have a job to do? That won't happen, of course. So I don't think the cost is that big an issue. I don't think the time spent is that strenuous. I think all this really does in real life is penalises people that are having trouble paying their rates. You know, I know for many years I was paying instalments as well. It's just, for a lot of people that's the easiest way, and for a lot of people that's the only way they can do it. So I don't like the way we've been penalising people for that.
Councillor Andrew?
Just asking a clarification question.
Yes.
So, the Director of Community and Corporate, in response to Councillor Clues' question about how much money we've raised from the interest, said 170,000. So that's not rates that we've recouped through our debt collection process. That's interest that we've received. Because I believe that was what Councillor Clues' question was, and I just wanted to make sure that figure is what that is. That's $170,000 worth of extra money or interest that we have received on late rates.
Okay. The Director of Community and Corporate?
Yes, that's quite correct. But it's also 170,000 that we've absorbed into building the budget. It's also $170,000 that we've had to carry in unpaid rates in the past. And it's part of those decisions that have been made when items have come through accounts with programmes of works, and part of that 170,000 goes to fund the projects in the CBP, capital works programmes, community programmes. So yeah, that's obviously revenue that's coming through that mechanism.
Thank you. Did you have any further questions or comments?
No questions. I find it really hard to stomach that we factor in $170,000 into our budget that isn't what we've issued in rates notices, but it's penalty interest, and that it's then worked into the budget. That to me borderlines unconscionable. I can't believe it. I'm absolutely in favour of this amendment. And I can't believe that we are charging some of probably our poorest and most vulnerable citizens an extra $170,000 in penalty interest for rates.
Is there a speaker against the amendment? Speakers for? Yes, councillor.
Just the question is, can you just clarify with that 170,000 whether that was rates that were due plus interest? Can I have that clarified, please, through the chair?
They were rates that were not paid, but the $170,000 was just the interest component.
Was just the interest. So what was the amount? What was the amount of rates not paid?
That figure would have to be calculated because people's rates notices vary, so there could be multiple values in there.
So, but it's only 7% of the rates that weren't paid. Is that correct?
No, 7% is the interest rate that is applied to the rate not paid.
Right. So the 170 is only 7% of the outstanding rates that weren't paid.
Not necessarily, because the value of each individual rate notice could vary. So if someone had a rate bill of, say, $10,000, their 7% interest will be different to someone who pays $5,000 worth of rates.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
A question?
If I may, yeah, thank you. Through your chair. Will we be, if this amendment is successful, will this affect the budget in that it will throw it into deficit or do we need to include, perhaps with the seconder's permission, I'll include that the budget be amended to reflect this change and present as a balanced budget?
Recommendation 6 will cover the budget, but if there's any material impact on this current budget, the Director of Community Corporate.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, as I mentioned in my previous response to Councillor Andrews, the impact on the budget is that if Council were not to support this motion this evening, there will be an initial deficit of around 170,000 that we will have to make adjustments for. And if I may also just say that the 170,000 is not just in the interest payments, it's the $11 payment for instalment that's collected as well. So if residents pay by instalments, the $11 fee, so it's not just all interest or penalty related.
Sure.
Thank you. Then if that's the case, can I, with the seconder's permission, include a new part to this amendment, or?
It's gone past the seconder,
yeah, okay.
and the mover.
Can I foreshadow an additional?
You can move in another amendment after this one is dealt with.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Are there any other speakers to the item? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, I think I certainly understand where Councillor Andrew and Councillor Clues are coming from. However, I think ultimately this is the sort of thing we needed to nut out in our initial councillor workshops when we were drafting the budget. I think they both make great points, but because I think we're not too far down the road, but I'd rather see us tackle these sorts of issues when we're working on the budget behind closed doors. So while I have a lot of sympathy for the sentiments in the room on that level, I'll be voting against the amendment. Thank you.
I understand the sentiments of Councillor Clues and Councillor Andrews, and I do empathise with the situation that they're talking about rates being a difficult issue at the moment to be able to be paid. However, most businesses have something like this set up to recoup unpaid debts. So I will be voting against this amendment.
Any other speakers? Councillor Noonan?
If I could ask a question through the chair.
Yep.
If this motion were to be accepted, passed, and if the motion that Councillor Clues has foreshadowed that the budget be adjusted to reflect the change in the revenue take, would there be, through the chair, any other implications or difficulties in implementing this particular motion, so motion 4, without that section?
The Chief Executive Officer.
Through you, Shire President, as the Director's in answer to your question, Councillor, I can foresee two problems. One is that without the ability to impose late penalties, it does have the potential to affect the Shire's cash flow.
Point of order. Believe the CEO may be making debate. The question wasn't related to the lack of, was to the operatableness of the rest of the item, not the effect of removing this particular part.
I believe the CEO was answering that question. Chief Executive Officer.
My understanding was that the Councillor's question was in relation to the impact of not having this section, so that was what I was. If I've misunderstood that, I'm happy for clarification, Councillor. It may impact upon when people pay and the council's cash flow. Ultimately, if this amendment goes through and we don't receive the revenue, and the council's intent is to bring a balanced budget, we would have to identify savings.
Are there any other Councillor Noonan?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, CEO and Director of Corporate Community, for your answers. I actually think that this is a very, very good amendment that Councillor Clues is bringing about with the foreshadowed motion that he is, or amendment that he has also suggested. I think it is unfair that the people who find it the most difficult to pay are often the first people who are penalised by things like this. I can foresee that there will be other people, people who can easily afford to pay, who will say, "Oh, that's terrific. I don't have to pay until, or I'm not going to. There's not going to be any penalty for taking those options," and so that will impact on the timing that a lot of people will choose to pay. And so for that reason, and this may be a debate perhaps not for this year, but perhaps for next year when we sit down and look at the budget, because this is an item, and drawing on, to Councillor Dillon's point, this is actually not a section or not a part of the budget that we really discussed in any detail in the workshops. We talked about assets and how we this is where the money goes and this is where the money comes from. We didn't talk about in any detail this particular aspect of collecting the rates. And so, okay, fair enough, it'll affect the timing that we get the money in, and that could well affect our cash flow. And so it would, if we make an allowance for that in the budget, so when we look to adjust the budget and seek to identify savings, I'd suggest that we need to be if this passes, that we would need to be that we would need to be vigorous in that pursuit, and that we should be, identify more savings than we might otherwise expect in the light of the anticipated cash flow challenges that we might have. But I think that this is a good amendment, and perhaps next year, that when we look at the same item, that we should actually spend a bit more time looking at this aspect of rates collection, and rather than resorting to penalties for people being late, that we should offer incentives for people to pay their rates on time. And so, in addition to Councillor Cluse's foreshadowed additional amendment, I would also like to foreshadow another amendment, if Councillor Cluse doesn't include it, that we seek to offer an incentive for people to pay their rates early, as a reward, and that hopefully will go part way to address that cash flow problem that this potentially could cause, and then also to have the balance, the budget adjusted so that it returns in balance as well. So I will be voting in favour of this amendment. I think we're moving in the right direction by doing that, by removing penalties for those who find it most difficult.
Are there any other speakers? I suppose I'll just say a few things. Look, I really do understand the reasons behind this as well. It's pretty tough out there for some parts of the community, and so I understand where this is coming from, but there is that aspect of the community who could take advantage of this. That's where I largely see this is targeted at. For the other side of the community who is having financial difficulty, well, we have a financial hardship policy. They can come and talk to the local government about arranging a payment plan to avoid these sorts of things and make the situation work for them. We adopted that some months ago. That's the angle we should take with those who are having financial difficulties, and not creating essentially a bit of a loophole for those who are somewhat, might be more well off, to get away and disrupting some of the cash flow to the business. The amount that is being collected though in interest is quite a high figure. I'm surprised by that, and that's probably something we need to take steps towards addressing. But I'm not really comfortable doing that on the fly tonight. So this is here for a reason, and if we do have members of our community who are struggling, please do contact our rate officers, do contact our staff, and we will work through it together. A
Could I ask
question?
a question, if I
Yes.
could, through the chair? With the financial hardship provisions that the Shire has, to what extent in those applications or requests, to what extent are the rates that a person has to pay, as I understand, financial hardship is basically spreading out the payments so that instead you can do it every week, that sort of thing, or every fortnight. But does it still apply the interest penalties and the late fee penalties?
The Director of Community and Corporate.
Thank you, through the chair. It's a case-by-case situation. In some cases, no, it doesn't. If there is a family, obviously in very financial hardship circumstances, and they are working with the Shire to obviously communicate with us what that situation is, we will do everything in our power to make sure that there's no penalties accrues on the account, and we can waive fees, and we can obviously tailor a programme to ensure that they're supported. But the rate levy is still payable to the Shire, albeit on a more palatable basis for that particular ratepayer. And like I was saying, I suppose one of these situations, and I'd hate to think that we've got sort of a tailored programme to suit every individual, or you can't. Every circumstance is very unique depending on what their financial circumstances is, and what our rate officers are really good at is talking to them, talking to the ratepayers, giving them options, and reaching a good amicable position, and listening. And we do understand it's very hard that especially with the current climate, and we certainly don't want to add to that burden by imposing anything that doesn't need to be imposed.
Thank you, Director. Any further comments? Councillor Clues?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll just close with a few comments. This recovery method's actually relatively new for the Shire. This wasn't in place only a few years ago. Certainly not to this degree. I think not sure if the rates were just increased or if in fact this didn't even exist 4 or 5 years ago. But it would seem to me that it hasn't brought the numbers of late payers down at all. So I don't think it's even serving its purpose, to be honest, in helping as a recovery method. Speaking of recovery methods, it was mentioned that this is quite normal for a business enterprise as a method of recouping costs, but the Shire doesn't have to force itself into business types of methods of doing things. There's actually legislative recovery methods already available to the Shire. Any home that's in debt for rates that's sold, as part of the transfer of sale, the Shire's rates are repaid as a priority of the sale price. So, and it can get to the point where the Shire can take a house should someone be actually chasing these loopholes that they've been called for too long. There are plenty of options available to the Shire that are legislated options. We're not required to chase legal pathways and spend fortunes on chasing people for money. We've got easy options. I'll just also remind everyone that if you just turn to the wall and look at the Shire's values, you'll see quite highly up there is empathy. Now, when we're focusing on, and even the fact that we're discussing the fact that people might try and take advantage of this loophole, it doesn't scream empathy to me at all. I think Councillor Noonan nailed it, and I'd actually written the same note on my pad that the correct thing to do, in my mind, would be to offer discounts and rewards to those that are paying early. And that's the way that the cash flow should be managed, to get the money coming in sooner and more regularly, and the way to do that is by reward. And the people that can afford it and get paid early, great, good for them, and the money comes in, good. All we're doing with this item is focusing solely on the people that can't afford to repay their rates in one shot. I just think that that's abhorrent. It's unnecessary and abhorrent. The fact that it is so unnecessary. We have legislated recovery methods available to us. And for the hardship policy, look, of course it's fantastic we offer a hardship policy. People shouldn't have to be forced to provide that level of personal, private and obviously sensitive information to the Shire. Not everyone's going to want to do that. I sure wouldn't. That's a horrible conversation to have, and to force people to do that, and it's the only way that they can get away with not being stung this extra rate, penalty fee. It's terrible. That's not empathy at all. So yeah, on all grounds, I'm absolutely against moving this as it was, and I hope I get the support to be rid of it once and for all.
I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that amendment is carried 4-3. That becomes the substantive motion. Councillor Clues?
Thank you. A new amendment has foreshadowed that the budget be adjusted to account for this previous amendment to provide a balanced budget.
If I may, Councillor, we can make that adjustment at recommendation 6 at the adoption of the budget item.
Whatever suits, that's fine. Thank you.
Yep, so you're withdrawing the amendment? Still got it on the table?
Thank you. Yes.
Yep, okay. So we're now back on the substantive item. Is there any other speakers? No. Councillor Dillon, wish to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-1. Now move to recommendation 5. Is there a mover? Councillor Dillon. A seconder? Councillor Tarantroy. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, this is one of those things, sort of fees for service and fees for utilisation of Shire halls and the like. We need to, make sure our rangers are adequately funded, and I suppose partially by dog registrations and all that sort of thing. So this is pretty much an endorsement of the officer's recommendation on these fees and charges.
Councillor Tarantroy. Is there anyone to speak against the item? Speakers for? No. Councillor Dillon, wish to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-1. Officer's recommendation number 6. You could move with amendment. Councillor Clues, moving with amendment.
I'll move with an amendment, thanks.
All right, what's the
Thank
amendment?
you, Chair. I'll include the, just to make adjustments to account for the amendment made to number 4. No, that wasn't clear enough, perhaps. Sorry.
Do you mind if the CEO provides you just a bit of advice on
That'd
that?
be great. I kind of feel like 6 is actually covering it anyway, and the amendment's not really necessary, but perhaps not.
Through you, Chair, the only part that's missing out of 6 so far is the reference to a balanced budget. So if you're happy as a mover, the words might be amended and authorises the CEO to effect changes to bring a balanced budget before distribution.
Perfect, thank you kindly.
All right, we'll wait for that to get up on the board. Are you happy with that, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
All right, is there a seconder to that? Councillor Noonan. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, yeah, it's obviously just a easy fix to clean up after the last amendment.
Councillor Noonan.
No, thank you. Nothing to add.
Any speakers against? Speakers for? Councillor Clues, you wish to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 5-2. Officer's recommendation number 7. Is there a mover? Councillor Dillon. A seconder. Councillor Tarantroy. Councillor Dillon.
Not much to contribute to this one, Mr. President, just a fact that sometimes variances do happen, and just allowing for our Shire staff to be able to deal with that. Thank you.
Councillor Terrantroy. Any speakers for or against? Councillor Dillon, wish to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 4-3. Officer's recommendation number 8. Is there a mover? Councillor Terrantroy. Seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor Terrantroy.
Not much to say about this, just moved as read. I think that it's a great idea to not duplicate inappropriate services and facilities, so I think it's a really good motion, and yeah, I hope my fellow councillors will support it.
Councillor Dillon. Any other speakers? Councillor Terrantroy. Anything further? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-1. Officer's recommendation number 9. Is there a mover? Councillor Dillon. Is there a seconder? Councillor Noonan. Councillor Dillon.
Just as read, Mr. President, thank you.
Councillor Noonan. Any speakers for or against? Councillor Clues. Any speakers? Councillor Dillon, nothing further. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 4-3. Now move to item 15.2, accounts paid during the month of June 2022. Is there a mover for those accounts? Councillor Terrantroy. A seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor Terrantroy.
Just moved as read, thank you.
Councillor Dillon. Any discussion on those? Councillor Terrantroy, anything? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 15.3, the Shire of Capel Regulation 17 Audit Report. Is there a mover for that item? Councillor Dillon. A seconder? Councillor Terrantroy. Councillor Dillon. Councillor Terrantroy. Any discussion? Nothing to close. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 15.4, appointment of an independent committee member. Is there a mover? Councillor Noonan. A seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll move that as read for the appointment of Dr. Kenneth Parker as an independent member for the Shire of Capel Audit and Risk Committee.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mogg. Is anyone to speak against? Speakers for? Councillor Noonan, anything further? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Sorry, I didn't see all hands in. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. We now move to item 16, new business of an urgent nature. I'll move the procedural motion that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with the Shire of Capel Standing Orders Local Law 2016 12.1G as the matter relates to personal affairs of a person. I'll move that. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Clues. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-1. Thank you, members of the public. I'll have to ask you to vacate the chambers for the time being.
ask that we have a 5-10 minute adjournment, brief adjournment.
Sure.
While the chamber's cleared.
All right, I'll adjourn the meeting for sorry, oh no, what I'll do is first is... Okay, for the record, item 16.1 was withdrawn. No decision was made. I will adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 8:05. All right, it being 8:05, I'll reconvene the meeting. Call it back to order. We now move to item 17, public question time. Are there any public questions? Could you please just state your name and locality for the record?
Thank you. It's Donna Brown. Good evening, councillors, Mr McMile and Shire staff. I'd like to ask the following question on behalf of Michael Titchbottom of 17571 South Western Highway, Boyanup. Michael's question is in relation to the extractive industry licences on location 287 South Western Highway and lot 393 Morris Road, Boyanup. Last week there was a substantial sand washout from these two locations across Morris Road and into the adjoining location 101. As well as the sand deposited across Morris Road, the sand has washed into the threatened ecological community, there's a TEC there, and has buried some of the rehabilitation site on location 101. The question is, what action does the Shire intend to take to prevent any further similar damage resulting in washouts from location 287 and location 393? Thank you.
The Chief Executive Officer.
Through you, Shire President, as I advised councillors today in a brief update, Shire officers attended the site on Monday when it became aware of the sand spill. We've taken photographic evidence. We've been in constant discussion with DeWer and constant discussion with the owner of lot 393 and the other lot. We understand that a reportable environmental report has been made by the owners of lot 101, and at this point in time we're still investigating the cause of the sand spill and what things could have been put in place to have prevented it, and then we will use that information in assessing any future extractive industry application.
A question, just state your name and locality for the minutes, please. Sorry.
We're not actually capturing a question on the audio, so...
Didn't turn on.
Can
Right.
we just ask that you...
My apologies.
Sorry.
Shire President Douglas. Members of the Shire. My name is Robert Gibbings. I live at 787 Gavins Road. The applicant for the sheep feedlot proposes an annual throughput of 250,000 sheep. It needs to be understood that most of those 250,000 sheep are already in the system. A producer somewhere is already breeding or purchasing lambs and fattening and sending them to the existing abattoirs. So those farm hands, workers, sale yard workers, feed mill operators, truck drivers and abattoir workers already have a job. The applicant claims the proposal creates 30 direct and indirect employment opportunities. What information has the Shire received as to what those jobs that are claimed to be being created are and where they will be located, including the numbers of on-site jobs, in other words, jobs in the Capel Shire?
Sorry, the microphone wasn't on as well. We'll take that question on notice, thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Jennifer Gibbings, 787 Gavins Road. We own the property on the corner of Cane and Gavins Road, the Plains, thank you, and share the other two boundaries with the proponent of the intensive sheep feedlot. The applicant recognises that the noise and odour assessment does show that a buffer extends beyond the boundaries of the subject site. We are one of several landholders that will be adversely impacted by the buffer zone. Our property is also adversely impacted by the siting of the access road to the sheep feedlot operations for the heavy vehicles from Gavins Road, as this is on our eastern boundary. The entry-exit point is next to the boundary corner, and the internal road runs the length of our eastern boundary, being constructed about 2.5 metres from our boundary fence. It doesn't appear that the odour and noise impacts of the heavy vehicles using the on-property road near our shared boundary and entering and exiting the property at Gavins Road has been assessed in the environmental assessment report commissioned by the applicant. Dust shouldn't be an issue, however, as page 14 of the DWER decision report indicates that shed floors and internal roads are being sealed with 30 millimetres of hot mix. The access road has been constructed without a culvert, resulting in water going into our property and in places close to flooding Gavins Road. We consider that the siting of the access point on Gavins Road presents a safety issue, given that at least 32 heavy vehicles per week, including B-double trucks, will be entering and leaving the site from an internal property road and gateway, not a recognised access point or designated access road. Can the Shire please advise, where else in the Plains Elgin localities does it occur that at least 32 heavy vehicles per week exiting from and entering into a private road have frontage access onto a local distributor road? And also, has the Shire of Capel given approval for the construction and use of this private access road and entry-exit point at Gavins Road? If so, what are the conditions?
Thank you, Ms Gibbings, for the question. We'll take that on notice.
Is it okay if I do one more?
Pardon?
Just one more?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, some spit. The Department of Water and Environmental Regulation Draft Works Approval Report states on page 2 of the decision report that the assessed throughput as per application is not more than 162,900 animals, lambs, per annual period. Further on page 3, the applicant expects that over a 10-month season, each shed will have 9 turnovers, equating to about 162,900 animals per year. On page 6 of the Cotera report of the development application, it states the proposed development will allow the applicant to hold up to 27,750 sheep in feedlots on its farm. Sheep are expected to be held in sheds for approximately 30 days, and on this basis the facility will have the capacity to process and turn out about 250 sheep each year. 250,000 sheep each year. On page 20 it continues, during the construction phase, the induction shed will both induct and feed sheep to market weight until the first feedlot shed is completed, after which time the induction shed will revert to being used to induct sheep only. So how does the assessed turnover of 162,900, that is the total of the 18,100 sheep in the 2 feed sheds having 9 turnovers, become the proposed turnover of 250,000 sheep annually? The annual throughput total can be reviewed by DWER if requested to do so by the applicant. However, one would expect that given an increase in sheep numbers per annum of approximately 1/3, the works approval would also be reviewed and reassessed in consideration of the increases in manure load, diseased animals on the compost pad and associated waste runoff, and expected changes in the separation distances to sets to receptors. To increase the yearly throughput to 250...
Apologies, Mrs Gibbings. I need you to come to a question soon.
250,000 sheep, the applicant would increase the number of turnovers annually. 14 turnovers would be needed, so problematic given that there are only 12 months in a year. The other mathematical solution to achieve the proposed annual throughput of 250,000 sheep would be to continue to use the induction shed as a feed shed, along with the 2 defined feed sheds, thus using the capacity of 27,750 sheep in the 9 turnovers of a 10-month season. Perhaps there is another solution to make 162,900 sheep become the 250,000 sheep throughput in a year. But if not, which governing entity, this is the question, sorry, President, which governing entity will ensure compliance of the declaration the induction shed will revert to being used to induct sheep only? Thank you.
Sure, we'll take that question on notice as well. Are there any further questions?
Good evening, councillors, Mr McMahon and Shire staff. I'm Rose King, 785 Gavins Road, Elgin. I'd like to ask the following question. Will the Shire planning staff, in preparing their DAP submission for the indoor intensive sheep feedlot on Lowry Road, the Plains, address the issues raised in question time at the last council meeting last week?
The submission period has closed, but the Shire will use that as part of its submission to the JDAP. It will form part of the informing documents.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? We'll move on to item 18, motions without notice, absolute majority of council. I believe there is one. Councillor Mogg has a motion. We need consent to hear that motion. I need absolute majority. Does the council permit the motion to be heard tonight? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 5-2. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, President. I would like to move the following motion without notice.
Sorry, Councillor, I've jumped the gun there. I didn't get a seconder to my own motion. So I'll move that again. Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Clues. I'll put that to the vote again. Those in favour? Those against? And that's carried 5-2. Apologies, my mistake.
Thank you, President. I would like to move the following motion without notice. At the next council meeting, receive and consider a report from officers that examines, and I stress examines, the discretionary uses in the priority agriculture zone of the new local planning scheme. And from this, consider initiating a scheme amendment to make intensive animal husbandry and or other uses an ex-prohibited use in this zone. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Pardon? Not for this motion. That was for the motion to be heard. Now this motion is a separate one. Councillor Clues. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, President. The reasons for this is about large industrial scale intensive feedlot farming, as well as other land uses that may be threat to farming viability in our Shire. This is big intense uses that may create noise, odour, waste and traffic. New and different land uses that take our highly valued productive farming land out of primary production, impacting our community. This is not about preventing an existing farmer from finishing their own stock in small temporary feedlots suited to the carrying capacity of their farm. This would remain as a minor or incidental part of agriculture extensive. The new planning scheme will shortly be gazetted, and this makes a large part of the Shire, including the Plains and Elgin, priority agriculture zone, recognising its high quality for productive agriculture. Farming these areas is part of the essence of our community, what makes our Shire who it is, and issues or what other types of uses we should contemplate here keep confronting this council. Too often, rural land is seen as the dumping ground for uses that may not fit into other zones. And we know how convenient our shire is to both Bunbury and Bustleton. A report like this should examine these threats, as well as opportunities for our farming land. This is separate to consideration of the current development assessment panel application for the feedlot, which will determine soon by the DAP, regardless of the Shire initiating this. This is a crucial issue for our Shire right now, not down the track or in 6 months' time. We need to proactively manage these urban sprawl issues. Designating so much of our Shire priority agriculture is the basis for taking this next step. The pressures of these applications are not going away. Thank you.
Councillor Clues.
Thank you. If I may start with a question through the chair. Would the following council meeting be an appropriate time frame to present such a report? I feel like it may be.
That's what was just getting whispered in my ear. Unfortunately not, given this could potentially be quite a substantial...
I'll move an amendment. Oh, I can't on the seconder.
You can suggest with the consent of the mover.
I'd, thank you. I guess, yeah, thanks. The idea of this I'm absolutely behind. I would recommend we time frame the provision of this report to a date that staff are happy to commit to. Additionally, I think it's probably a good idea to take out the words "and I stress examines" as a council decision. The council wouldn't be referring to itself as "I." It just seems a bit clunky in the item, but obviously that's going to be for someone else to hopefully fix.
So,
thanks.
Are you suggesting those changes to the mover, or?
Oh, that's what I did.
Yes.
Sorry, I thought
Okay,
you were
so
saying someone else would have to move an amendment. It's late again.
No, you can,
apologies.
because it hasn't been spoken to yet as the seconder, but the mover has to consent.
Okay, thank you.
So, the changes would be to the earliest possible council meeting?
No, I think a time frame is always a good idea, so I'd hope that the staff would perhaps offer an option there.
The Chief Executive Officer.
Through you, Shire President. The challenge, Councillor, is I'm actually unclear how much work is involved in doing what the motion asks to do. And I'd be cautious about making a commitment to a particular meeting that I can't meet. Alternatively, I could suggest, and then obviously if we're having difficulty because of the extent of the work, I'd come back to council and ask for an extension. If I understand your reasoning, and I'm normally happy to provide a time if I've got confidence in the amount of work that it involves. On this case, I just simply don't have that level of confidence. So I'd prefer to have, at the earliest opportunity, and have a commitment from officers that will crack on with it. I'm just unclear how much work's involved. If you want an actual month, I'd prefer to say October, and then if we can't do the amount of work required, come back to council and ask for more time.
Thank you. It would be my recommendation to do that, to have the October date provided, and of course we'd be happy, I suspect, to defer to a later date if required. So yeah, thanks. Next council meeting, please, to October OCM. Thank you. Oh, now the bit's already fixed. Thank you.
I consent to the changes.
Thank you. You still have the call, Councillor Clues?
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to seeing the report. This is a great idea, I think. It'd be very interesting to have a close look at it. Thank you.
Is there a speaker against the motion? Speaker for? Councillor Noonan?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor Mogg for bringing this motion to Council and Councillor Clues for your amendment to it. I think it is good that we look at the type of agricultural use that we do get a council, a Shire officer's recommendation, and it needs to be very thorough and very carefully worked through, because the last thing I'd like to see is for us to inadvertently make the Marron Farm, Capel Marron Farm, a victim of this proposal if it wasn't correctly worded. You know, I see that as a tremendous opportunity for the Shire, and there are other intensive types of agriculture where the welfare of animals is always front and centre, and where indeed their condition is and the conditions in which they're looked after are in fact selling points, that they're in fact more ethical than just allowing animals to free range in terms of the welfare of the animal. So yeah, I think it would be good to have this report come to the council, and I'd be very interested to see our Shire officer's recommendations, and yeah, so I'll support the motion through the chair.
Is there any further speakers on the item? No? Councillor Mogg, just close.
Oh, hang on. Do I have to wait to do another amendment until this becomes a substantive, and then we do an amendment?
This is a substantive, and I've offered the right of reply to the mover. So there's no further discussion or debate.
Can I take one?
There's no permissibility of questions either. I've offered the right of reply, sorry. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, President. I'd just like to thank fellow councillors for your consideration and helping adopt this motion, and thank you for the amendments, and also look forward to the officer's report. Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Item 19, notice of motion to be considered at the next ordinary council meeting. Nothing? No. There is no items for consideration behind closed doors. And with that, I will declare the meeting closed at 8:28. Thank you very much for your attendance.